Chapter 17. A Perilous Crossing. As the Dana girls looked on tensely, Mr. Strong struggled amid the rapids. By this time, the dugout and its paddle had been swept out of his reach. The rancher turned toward the far shore and tried to make his way there, but the swift current and slippery rocks made this impossible. He went down again. "We must help him," Louise said fearfully. "Jean, you pull in the dugout. I'll try to find something else to use for a paddle and go after him." Jean hauled on the rope. The dugout moved a few inches, then stopped. It was caught on a rock. There was nothing for her to do but wait and hope that the force of the current would release it. As soon as this happened, Jean started pulling again. "Hang on!" she cried out to Mr. Strong. "We're coming to get you as soon as we can." The rancher had regained his footing and stood nearly waist deep in the rushing water. He braced himself as best he could and teetered as he tried to keep his balance. "Be careful," he shouted. "Don't let the dugout overturn again." Louise, meanwhile, had finally located a piece of driftwood along the shore. It was just about the right length and thickness to be used as a paddle. She picked it up and hurried back to her sister. Slowly, Jean's efforts were bringing the dugout nearer shore. There was another long wait when the craft was again caught on some protruding rocks, but eventually the rushing water freed it, and Jean was able to pull the canoe onto the bank. "Louise, if you do manage to reach Mr. Strong in this dugout, what are you going to do then?" Jean asked. "I'll paddle to the far shore," Louise replied. "Then, if the rope's long enough, I'll tie it to a tree over there. After that, I'll come back here in the dugout by holding onto the rope. You and I will take the horses across." Jean heaved a tremendous sigh. "I hope it works. Good luck." Louise winked at her sister. "If it doesn't, a certain girl named Jean Dana may have 2 rescues on her hands." Jean struck a dramatic pose, as if she were ready for the challenge. But instantly, the 2 girls became serious. Louise climbed into the dugout and kneeled in the bow. She dipped her improvised paddle into the water and started across the stream. Her sister took hold of the rope a few feet from the canoe and walked up the bank. She let out the lariat little by little as Louise battled the current. Fortunately, her skill, together with Jean's perfect timing, maneuvered the craft so that it came alongside Mr. Strong. "I won't climb in," he said, gasping. "I'll just hold on to the dugout and guide it. Keep going, Louise. You're doing a swell job." By this time, Louise was too far out in the stream for Jean to be of much service, except to hold on to the rope. She held her breath at each dip of Louise's paddle. But finally, the 2 reached the opposite shore in safety. The rope had proved to be long enough. "Hooray!" Jean cried out. Louise and Mr. Strong waved their thanks for her part in the rescue. Then the rancher said, "If we expect to continue our journey, the hardest part is yet to come. We'll have to figure out how to bring Jean and the horses across." Louise smiled. "I have an idea," she said, and told him what she had in mind. "That's fine, just fine," he approved. "Wish I could be of more help, but I think I'd better rest for a while. I'm all in." His legs were almost numb from the ice-cold water and the pounding of the turbulent stream, the rancher confessed. He also had bruises and abrasions on his face and hands and was very pale. Mr. Strong rolled up his wet trousers, took off his boots and socks, and chafed his legs vigorously. Louise asked him if there was anything she could do to make him more comfortable, but he told her, "Don't worry. Just concentrate on getting Jean and the horses to this side of the water." She untied the end of the rope from the dugout and secured it tightly to a tree limb. The ample line was nearly taut, exactly the way she wanted it. Louise gripped the dugout, pushed it back into the water, and stepped aboard. She swung her right arm over the guide rope, then began to paddle toward the opposite shore. The journey back was not easy, but with the aid of the rope, she found it to be less arduous than the trip over. When she reached her sister, Jean whooped for joy. "You're marvelous," she shouted. "Absolutely marvelous." "Better save your praise until we and the horses are on the other side," Louise cautioned. "I think we should loop each horse's reins around the rope and tie the lines together," Jean suggested. "But we're short of rope." "How about our belts?" Jean asked. "Fine," Louise agreed. The two girls whipped off their leather belts. Louise tied hers from Ginger's back saddle string to the bridle rings of Silverstreak, while Jean tied hers from Silverstreak to Jubilee. She herself would hold the lead rope of the pack horse. Louise mounted and led the way, looping her reins across the lariat and tying them. Jean swung Silverstreak's lines over the rope and secured them to the saddle horn. Finally, she mounted Jubilee, adjusted her reins, tossed the lead rope over the lariat, and held it firmly. "All set?" Louise called. "Let's go!" The sisters held on to the lariat with one hand, and with the other the manes of their horses. They guided the animals with their knees, in and out among the boulders. Both girls knew the horses could easily slip and break a leg. The rope swayed back and forth, and once it was pulled so tightly when the pack horse stumbled that the girls were afraid it might snap in two. But the lariat held. Mr. Strong watched the scene with bated breath. How brave the girls were, he thought, and how resourceful. When the girls reached the precarious spot where the rancher had gone overboard, they became especially cautious. Once Ginger faltered, and Louise's heart gave a leap, but the mare kept her balance and went on, plodding at a very slow rate through the water. Finally, the Palomino reached the bank, with Silverstreak directly behind her. In a few moments, Jean, Jubilee, and the pack horse were safe. Mr. Strong wrung the girl's hands warmly. "I never thought you could do it," he said. "When you were halfway across, I was kicking myself for allowing you to even try it." Louise and Jean laughed, and Jean said, "Maybe we should thank Hal Compton for that dugout. Without it, we might still be stranded on the other side. By the way, who's going back to untie the other end of this lariat and bring it here?" "I think," said Mr. Strong, "that we ought to leave the rope the way it is. We may want to get back across in a hurry." It suddenly occurred to the three adventurers that they were extremely hungry. Mr. Strong, feeling that everyone had had enough exercise for the day, including the horses, said, "I suggest that we make camp here for the night. It's a good level spot." The day had turned out to be an unseasonably warm one, and the girls were sure they would enjoy sleeping outside. Mr. Strong asked them to gather wood for a small fire, which he would let burn until daylight. Louise looked at him worriedly. "To keep away wild animals, I suppose?" she asked. The rancher nodded. "I'm not taking any more chances," he said. "We've been lucky so far. We mustn't tempt fate." The Danas opened cans of meat, beans, and tomato juice. Then the campers gathered around the fire. As they ate, Mr. Strong began to tell stories of his life in the West. Jean's eyes had wandered toward the horses. Presently she asked, "Silverstreak is so beautiful. Where did you get him?" Proudly, the rancher said that he had caught the horse himself. "He was just a little fellow, one of a band of wild horses. He was as frisky as they come right from the start. Getting a hackamore on him was like doing a fast-stepping dance." "And how about the saddle?" Louise asked. "That was even worse," Mr. Strong replied. "I thought I'd never get that colt broken to the saddle. But once it was accomplished, he became gentler and more responsive than most horses. I wouldn't part with him for all the gold in Colorado. At least I don't think I would," he added with a grin. Soon dusk came on, and the 3 weary travelers unrolled their sleeping bags. As the Danas nestled into theirs, the girls' thoughts turned to Baron. Where was he? Would they ever see him again, alive and safe? Despite these troubled thoughts, they drifted off to sleep. It was morning when they awakened. The sisters looked around. Mr. Strong was nowhere in sight. "I wonder where he went," said Jean, crawling out of her bag. "Maybe he went off to get wood for a breakfast fire," Louise guessed. The girls rolled up their sleeping bags and put them on the pack horse. Then they washed at the stream and combed their hair. Still Mr. Strong did not appear. "Oh dear, I hope nothing has happened to him," said Louise, and called the rancher's name loudly several times. There was no answer. End of chapter 17.